With the draft and the start of free agency just days away, we open up the mailbag to answer your questions about what off-the-radar prospects might be an option for Miami, PJ Tucker's future with the Heat, and chances of Pat Riley landing another whale. All that and more on today's draft edition of Locked On Heat.
I'm taking 10 blue notebooks with me to Malibu with my wife. Blue notebooks. Blue notebooks. Blue notebooks. 10 blue notebooks to Malibu. Blue notebooks. Blue notebooks. Blue notebooks. 10 blue notebooks to Malibu.
My life.
Hello, Heat Nation. It's a Wednesday edition of Locked On Heat, your daily podcast covering all things Miami Heat. However, you may be listening or watching on YouTube, Odyssey, or in your favorite podcast app. Thanks so much for making us your first listen every day. I'm David Ramil, and with me, as always, is my co-host, Wes Goldberg. One live NBA draft show is not enough for Locked On. Every show is going to be live on draft night, so join us 15 minutes after our pick over here at Locked On Heat on YouTube for the immediate reaction from your local expert. Subscribe now to Locked On Heat so you know when we go live. We haven't done this for a while with Miami's extended run in the playoffs, of course. We were covering games, and now with the draft just a few days away, we wanted to increase our coverage of what potential picks might be available to Miami. But free agency is just on the heels of that. So we wanted to open up the mailbag because you've got questions about what potential players Miami might be able to land, who could be available via trade, and much, much more. But we'll start off our mailbag with some questions about the draft. And this first one comes in from Carlton, who asks, what are the chances the Heat select someone on Thursday, even if they buy a second-round pick after trading the first?
Yeah, I mean, you talk to people around the league, reports that have been coming out over the last few days, and they're all indicating the same thing, that the Heat are one of those teams that are expected to possibly trade this pick, in connection to some sort of larger deal to get back a high-level player or even an all-star. That said, I think the likelihood is pretty high that the Heat end up selecting somebody at 27 and probably get somebody even potentially in the second round, despite the fact that they don't have a second round pick. And I want to get to that in a minute. But they have the 27th pick. I think they're going to choose somebody. Now, whether or not that player is for the Heat or for another team, where if the Heat are picking for another team and then, a month after the draft, they can actually turn around and flip that player in part of a larger deal. I think that seems to me to be the most likely outcome Thursday night, because even if they want to trade the 27th pick for some sort of star player, it makes more sense to select that player for the other team and then trade that player, so that way it unlocks trading the 2023 first round pick and then potentially other picks down the line. It just increases the flexibility. So and usually you don't really see other teams, even if that team isn't getting the 2023 first rounder in a deal, you don't really see other teams, fighting over that kind of stipulation, because it doesn't really matter. The league year doesn't start in a month. And then after a month of choosing that player is then eligible to be traded. So I think that's what's going to happen. But there's other reports too. Like, a lot of people around the Heat also feel like they might just trade out of the pick altogether and not take anybody, where they could trade 27 for a future first rounder or maybe multiple second round picks down the line, so that because that, the big whale trade might not be available Thursday night. So rather than take a player, and it's sort of like a used car, right? As soon as you drive the car off the lot, it loses its value. Well, if you're the Heat, maybe we trade that first round pick for a first round pick in the future, that great old mystery box that has so much trade value in the league these days. Well, let's, instead of using it and then driving that car off the lot, we could trade it, kind of kick that can down the road and maintain that asset that we otherwise wouldn't have. And so I could see that, but I just don't really think the Heat want to get into the game of shoulda, woulda, coulda, maybe we need this asset in the future, all these hypotheticals. Because I do think, as we talked to Rafael Barlow on yesterday's show, this is a rather deep draft, and I think there will be a quality player available at 27, and I think that the Heat would be motivated to at least take that player.
Right. So to answer Carlton's question, 100% chance that they'll select somebody. They're not going to trade the pick away because, as you said, there's
you
more
got it
value.
100%. I wouldn't go with 100%, but nothing's guaranteed these days, but I see what you're saying.
Yeah, they're going to make a pick. Whether they keep that pick is that's the other question. And again, yeah, to bring up your point about what Raphael said, there's so much talent, or the disparity between the 15th pick and say even the 45th pick isn't that wide. And we're seeing this more and more, especially with a team like Miami. They can afford to take a flyer on a guy that maybe is raw or isn't quite proven, as long as there
Yeah.
is an elite work ethic, just some kind of verbal level, recommendation from a coach or coaching staff that they trust. Something like Frank Martin at the University of South Carolina, or of course, over at Kentucky. There's, once they have an established pipeline of a player or a draft pick or something like that, they'll be willing to take a flyer on somebody that might be a second round pick. Knowing that they can bring them into camp and harness that skill so that they can maximize that and become an NBA player. So I think even if they wind up making a first round pick, I still think, even if they trade that pick, they're still going to wind up selecting somebody else, a younger prospect that they can bring in. Now, again, I
Or
mean,
somebody undrafted, right? Because we saw a lot, as we
absolutely.
know, like a lot of these second rounders, if they don't want to sign two-way deals or whatever, their agents can maneuver their way out of the draft
Right.
completely. And somebody that might have a second round grade could be available as an undrafted free agent.
Yeah. They're
There's
bringing in a body. I mean, somebody. And I hate to say it so
yeah.
coldly, but that's
No,
the
no, but they'll
reality
bring in somebody to training camp at the very least just
for
to give them a
sure.
run, right? And we know that
For
they're going to
sure.
fill out their summer league program and then later potentially Sioux Falls with some of these
Yeah.
undrafted guys. So even if if you're a Heat fan, you don't care about the draft, or you don't even think that whoever that gets picked at 27 will ultimately be with the Heat on opening night, it's worth kind of getting into the weeds of this thing even a little bit, because somebody from this draft class, one way or the another, will end up within the Miami Heat program at some level, anywhere from
Yep.
summer league to the opening night roster on a two-way contract or something like that. And you look at the names that they've brought in, like we know that Christian Braun has been worked out, Jake LaRavia has been worked out, Blake Wesley out of Notre Dame has been worked out.
Right.
Andrew Nembhard has been worked out by Miami. These are all guys with late first round, early second round grades. And then you
Yep.
go even further, somebody like Arkansas center Jalen Williams, who has some interesting things. Justin Lewis out of Marquette. Josh Minnow out of Memphis. You go and Jabari Walker out of Colorado. I know we have a question about him later on. And John
Yeah.
Butler out of FSU. Like those are just a few of the names that we know have worked out for the Heat in the last few days. Those are guys with either like mid second, late second, or even undrafted grades that could
Right.
ultimately find their way to Miami. And then you look at like the second round, what's available to them. What if the Heat trade the 27th pick, right? Or agreed to trade the player selected at 27, however you want to phrase it, but still have value one of these second round guys? They could potentially buy their way into the second round, at the top end of the second round, even, because a lot of those teams are expected to be selling off their picks. And Miami
Yep.
has almost $6 million in cash assets to use, and this is kind of where you use that. That
Yep.
is in trades and potentially in draft picks. You look down, like Orlando is at 32 and 35. They could sell off one of those picks. Portland at 36 could sell off that pick. Sacramento at 37. The Spurs at
Hmm.
38. The Knicks at 42. The Clippers at 43. Minnesota has 40, 48,
Right.
and 50. All those teams could presumably sell that pick, and the Heat could find their way back into the draft to get somebody that maybe not a lot of other people are very high on.
I'd look at the Knicks pick in particular just because they're trying to clear as much cap space as possible to sign a guy
Yes,
like Jalen Brunson.
I agree with you.
So they won't be able to afford having a second round pick as an option on the roster. That's kind of money that you just don't need to expend on
Yeah.
any one player like that. So I would see that as a likely
And the
trade
Clippers
scenario
at
there.
43, I think, is a good one too.
Yeah. So we'll see how that pans out. But you mentioned Jabari Walker before. We've gotten a lot of comments from a few different viewers over on YouTube and
Yeah.
via Twitter about Walker, the forward out of Colorado. What's your take overall on his game and his fit
He's
in Miami?
sort of like a poor man's Herb Jones. You know what I mean? Like he's 6'8", 7 foot wingspan, 200 pounds, looks the
Isn't
part of
Herb
the NBA
Jones a
player.
poor man? Herb Jones?
It, there will be no disparaging of Herb Jones on this podcast, David. But yeah, like that. But to your point, like Herb Jones is just what, like a nice role player, like a nice
Yep.
find in the second round last year for New Orleans. And Jabari Walker is, I think, a lot of teams and maybe even a lot of fans who are commenting, kind of trying to find the next Herb Jones. And there's some stuff to
Mhm.
like the on-ball defense is good. The help defense is, he's acute. He's aware on that end. There's some upside with the shot because of the high release and the things that, his ability to just get that shot off. But he's not a dynamic dribbler, offensive player, ball handler, shooter, shot creator at all. Like there's almost nothing to work with offensively other than just the height, the fact that he looks like an NBA player. He's really, really raw on that end. So there's going to be a lot of tinkering. But if you're just looking for a big body who can defend multiple positions, then yeah, Jabari Walker's a nice player. He's one of these guys I think that's not even in the mix in the first round. I would be shocked if he was taken in the first round. Seems like to me he could be a second round guy but could also go undrafted if he's trying to avoid a two-way contract too. But he's going to need some time in the G League to polish up the offensive side of his game.
I'm just not sure what the fit is for Miami. Like, I think they can get the most defensively out of almost any player. So the fact that they would, again, spend money to acquire a second round pick on what is almost exclusively a defensive specialist doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. Even internally, they had belief that KZ Okpala would continue to grow offensively. They saw enough there from a talent perspective that he would take the leap. It never happened. So that was a faux pas on their part, but I don't know that they're willing to, again, now knowing what this roster is like, what they're like moving forward, they want somebody a little bit more versatile on both sides of the ball. I don't know that he's the right fit for Miami, but I've been wrong before. I didn't see the Okpala pick coming either. Neither of us predicted that one, and yet it happened. Again, they were high on him until they weren't, and obviously they wound up trading him to the Oklahoma City Thunder. We'll talk about a few potential sleepers that might slip to Miami, or again, might even wind up being undrafted in the next segment. But before we do that, just wanted to remind you that betonline.net continues to be your number one source for all of your betting needs and sports info. You can find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's NHL playoffs and Major League Baseball. BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sporting wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. And betonline.net remains the best spot for all of your sports scores, podcasts, news this season. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check on all of your favorite sports and events, including MMA, boxing, and golf. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. You're making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Just a reminder that you can always reach us via email at lockedonheat@gmail.com or via Twitter using the hashtag AskLHeat. Be sure to please subscribe to the show and leave a review. We're opening up the mailbag right before the draft and the start of free agency. So we've got a couple more questions about the upcoming draft. And this one comes in from Ricky. He asked Wes, who is your favorite prospect in the draft that others might not be high on? The potential sleeper here. Anybody else that you see fits the bill that maybe somebody just doesn't quite like?
Yeah, frequent listeners of the show will know how high I am on Christian Koloko, the center out of Arizona.
Who? I'm not sure I'm familiar with him.
The guy you hate, David. Remember Christian Koloko?
Oh yeah.
So, but avoiding the Koloko
upside
thing just because we've been there already. Again, Rafael Barlow brought up a great name on yesterday's show in the first segment. Peyton Watson, the forward out of UCLA. Yeah. I didn't really do much work on him, being honest, until Rafael brought him up, and I was looking at some of the film on him this morning. I really like him. I think he could be a steal at the end of the first round. And it sounds like he's gaining momentum from league insiders. Like he's gaining momentum as maybe even a late first round type of guy. He was a highly heralded recruit at a high school, really athletic, a lot of things to like. You talk about a poor man's Herb Jones and Jabari Walker. Peyton Watson's like a rich man's Herb Jones. Okay. And not to turn this show into comparing a bunch of players into Herb Jones, but there's enough, unlike Jabari Walker, where I think you made a really good point. Like you want something there offensively to make your investment worth it, right? How many, like there's so many just long guys who project as good defenders coming in and out of the league all the time. You want the offense is still today the most important part of the game today is putting up points. And with Peyton Watson, there's enough there that you could project forward. He made threes at a really good clip at UCLA last year. You watch the interviews with him. He's working on his mid-range game. He's working on you listen to him talking. He's working on the right things. And then and athletically, there's so much to like there. He projects as a good finisher and all these things. And I think that he could be somebody that a lot of people are looking at as a second round grade, but could sneak his way into the end of the first round. And then one other guy that I'll bring up because we haven't really talked about him a whole lot is Wendell Moore out of Duke, the wing.
Yeah.
6'5" with a 7-foot wingspan. I think he's an NBA ready defender right away. Quick hands. He's gonna jump a lot of passing lanes. He's good in transition. He's good at just poking the ball out from ball handlers, not even like loose balls, but just kind of with those wraparound quick hands, like poke out of the back of the ball handler. He's able to create things and be disruptive on that end, as well as defend with his chest, defend in close quarters, and execute switching schemes, fight over screens really well. And you could just sort of just picture him on an NBA defense right away, including a high level NBA defense like Miami's. And then offensively, again, he can knock down shots. There's probably not a ton there offensively to work with. He's not going to be, a number one or even a number two, but
Mhm.
as a guy who could space the floor and knock down open threes, he's a smart cutter. There's a lot to like there.
Yeah, no, I can see all those points. I agree with you on all those players. There was the name that Raphael mentioned in yesterday's episode, which you should totally check out. I mean, I know
Yeah.
just in listening to the current state of Heat Twitter, which is never the most accurate gauge for any fan base, but I think it's a representative of a very loud minority. The draft isn't overly concerning, right? Because, like me, I have come to kind of distance myself from the draft over years of covering and following this team. It's like they don't tend to really emphasize draft picks. And then all of a sudden they do select a Tyler Herro who you've never heard of, or a Bam Adebayo that you've never heard of. And then, wait and see. Obviously, these players wind up panning out and becoming hugely productive, but, you have to trust that Miami knows what they're doing. Now, Raphael brought up a name,
Well,
Ibu. I'm
the Heat
sorry.
do know what they're doing to your, like, that's
Yes,
like the NBA people really respect what the Miami Heat do in the first round. If the Heat
absolutely.
take somebody, like, look at the last few picks that they've had.
Yeah.
For the most part, they pan out. Everybody talks about the first round even as a crapshoot. For the Heat, it really hasn't. Like, in the first round, they've gotten really good players outside of Justice Winslow and the KZ Okpala thing. Like, that's
Hey,
a
hey.
really small. But even with those two guys, that's a small
Right,
fail rate. That is a really
right.
small fail rate compared to other NBA front offices.
So Raphael mentioned Ibu Baji, a Senegalese player who's played overseas, 7'1", just solid
Yeah.
physical specimen, and just a guy who can really he has the physical tools to take it to the next level. He's a little raw, but he's kind of that center position that you're looking to shore up, or if you're looking for a backup, or maybe even potentially somebody who could play alongside Bam Adebayo. He's one of those names too. A guy
Christian
that
Coloco too, David. Don't forget Christian
I,
Coloco.
I've heard of him, but I'm not a big fan of his game. I like Marjan Beauchamp. We haven't really talked about him in our Blue Notebook series, but I just the way, just his journey, the fact that he was almost out of basketball, that he had to he's come to the realization that this is what he wants to do. Like, he's the inverse of those guys that kind of scare off teams, right? Because they're like, oh, well, why did he have doubts in the first place? It's like, I don't care that he had doubts. What I'm focused on is the fact that he had doubts and he said, you know what, that doesn't matter. I want to do
Yeah.
this. This is where I want to be, and he wants to succeed at the NBA level. So I'm a little higher on him than most, perhaps.
I
But
like him too.
also,
No,
yeah,
before we move off of Beauchamp, like, you just watch him run.
yeah,
Sometimes it's as simple as that. He is so fluid. He is such a
yep,
smooth athlete, and he's long, right? 6'6" with the 7'1" wingspan, and he runs the floor like a gazelle. He's awesome in transition. He knows when to
yep,
cut to the basket. He knows when to flare out to the three-point line. He's smart. He thinks the game a
yep,
lot, and I
yep,
think that that's probably the mechanical part of his game that needs some shoring up, but he's thinking the game and he's got good intentions, which
yeah,
is half the battle. He's really young. Like, as long as he's thinking the game, eventually that stuff will become second nature, and you
yeah,
could really see him blossom. I think 3 or 4 years down the road, but immediately he defends really, really well at a high level with that wingspan, so he can make an impact right away. And based on his career, his numbers at the Ignite from 3-point range weren't good, but you
yeah.
look at his
Those
career
are,
numbers
you
in
could
high
dismiss
school
those.
and
Yeah,
JUCO, like, the 3-point numbers were a lot better.
yeah.
So there's something like there. Yeah.
Yeah, and somebody else that we've talked about before on the show, EJ Lidell. Obviously, we're both pretty
Yes.
high on him. I think he's just going to translate right away into a scoring potential. Guy who can play the five at some points, play the four. He's got the effort, the dedication, the work ethic, all the things that Miami's looking for in a key player, especially with the potential free agency of PJ Tucker. He's opted out of his contract. We don't know what's going to happen with him. While he'd like to be in Miami, he's also like that long-term security of being able to have a 3-4 year deal at this point of his career,
Mhm.
which seems unlikely, but yet here he is. And so knowing that maybe your future with PJ is a little tenuous, maybe if you can somehow find Lidell at
Yeah.
27 pick, or maybe if you can trade up in the draft and acquire him, I think he's worth the gamble there. But we'll move
Well, if
on.
the Heat, no, I mean it's a really good point by you. And if the Heat end up, look, I think there was always potential for the Heat to look for a PJ Tucker backup, just because
Mhm.
Markieff Morris is also a free agent. They didn't really have that player last year. Caleb Martin was kind of playing out of position there. By the way,
Yep.
the Heat have extended his qualifying offer, making him a restricted free agent. That was
Yeah.
reported today. But even like EJ Liddell, who might not be there, but like the Heat, like Jake LaRavia out of Wake Forest, he could fill that
I
backup
like
four
him.
position, kind of like a Kyle Anderson type, right?
Yeah.
Justin Lewis out of Marquette. Like if the Heat feel that or if their intel on PJ Tucker is that he could leave, that could bump a guy like Justin Lewis or Caleb Houston out of Michigan or some of these other guys up their draft board, right? If
Yep.
they feel like they're going to need to replace that guy a little bit later, especially a guy like Jake
Absolutely.
LaRavia, who's kind of that NBA ready now, who might not have a ton of upside, but
Right.
feels like he can make some sort of impact right away as a rookie.
Yeah.
They could telegraph quite a bit potentially here at 27.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Some a move is going to be made. We don't know what it is. Nobody does, and yet there's a lot of potential there. Obviously, this is the exciting part of the draft, and yet you don't have to lose 50 games a year just to get here. So that's the inverse of what other teams are doing right now. But we'll move on away from the draft. From this question, kind of tying into what we were just talking about, from probably butchering this, Vietizi, he or she writes in, I do like PJ on the Heat, but I really hope we don't overpay. That's an interesting comment,
Well,
not necessarily a question there. But regarding PJ Tucker, what would you consider an overpay? Again, I just
they
mentioned
can't
it. I don't.
overpay him. They can't. They can't. The only because they don't have full bird rights. They only have early bird
Sure,
rights. So the most that they could do is give him $1 million more. Like he's not getting like even if the Heat wanted to give him the full mid level exception of $10 million, they can't. Under NBA rules, they can't. We don't need to explain the entire CBA, but just
it's
at the
ridiculous.
end of the day, that's what they can do is get up to $8.4 million. And I don't even think the person in this comment would consider $1 million raise based on PJ's performance last year an overpay. It would not be an
Well,
overpay.
what
So
about
if what
the length of contract? Though? Like that's my concern. Is like he's
eh,
37. We saw him break. You think
the
he's going to
windows
be
now.
productive? You think he's going to be PJ
No,
Tucker, this level of
no,
PJ Tucker for the next 3 seasons?
nope. But if you're able to be competitive and compete potentially for a title for the next year or two, and you have to eat a tough contract at the end of this, then yeah, it's worth it. I don't care. And I don't think the Heat care
So
either.
so 3 years, what, 20 million? You think that's
27 million,
fair?
right?
27
Is
million,
that what the
3 years,
math is? I'm
27.
bad at math. You know that.
Is it eight? No,
Call
that
it
would be
8
like,
times 3.
yeah.
24 million. Something like that. Yeah.
24, 3 year 24. Well, I mean, that feels like a slight overpay, but I guess to your point, you can probably always eat the cost, and who knows what happens down the road. For now,
Maybe
to
make
keep
the
Jimmy
maybe make the
happy,
third year partially
team option.
guaranteed or a
Yeah,
team option or something like that. I could see that being the compromise here
yeah,
potentially.
that makes sense. This one comes in from that one guy. I know who that is. Could Depot be included in a sign and trade with Duncan Robinson for someone, or what
Yeah.
are those rules like? Do you
Well,
have that?
this actually takes a little bit longer to explain, so maybe we should get to our break and then come back at this on the other end.
Ah, that's what's called a tease, ladies and gentlemen. We'll answer more of these questions about free agency in the next segment. But before we do that, I want to talk about one of Wes's favorite snacks from Built Bar, the new Mud Pie Built Bar. It's great. We just had them shipped. I think it's last week. Delicious flavor. What do you like about it, Wes, in comparison to some of the other Built Bar flavors?
So this is one of the Built Bar Puffs flavors, and if you have not
Right.
tried any of the Puffs flavors, do it. It's different than the other Built Bars. I'm a big fan of all the Built Bar products. I really am. But we have gotten comments that their initial, like that original Built Bar, is a little too sweet or even dense
Yeah.
for some
Mm,
people. And if you tried the Built Bars and that's your opinion of the Built Bar, then just give the Built Bar Puffs a shot. Like I said, I like all the products. My fiance is not a big fan of the regular Built Bars, but she loves
really?
the Puffs. We had the birthday cake one as well.
Mm,
Like both of those flavors are really good. They're not as sweet. They're a little bit lighter, fluffier, but comes with that great packed with flavor profile that the other Built Bars also have. And they're just a little bit easier to eat, not as dense, not as filling, and just a really great snack. Where I was using the other Built Bars as meals sometimes. This is just sort of like a
yeah.
midday snack when I'm a little hungry, or even just right
Mm.
after a workout to get a little punch of protein in. And these are delicious. They're absolutely delicious.
And again, they're fit all kinds of different diets. They provide all the nutrients you're looking for. And again, you feel like you are indulging in a delicious treat, but in fact, you're getting all the nutrients you might be looking for out of a protein bar. So go to built.com right now. Use the promo code LOCK15 and you'll get 15% off your order. Use the promo code LOCK15 for 15% off your order at built.com. The first picks of the Ultimate NBA Mock Draft have been made. Search now for the Ultimate NBA Mock Draft and get over 50 insiders, the Odyssey sports experts, and the draft experts of the Locked On NBA Big Board, including Rafael Barlow. The 5-episode Ultimate NBA Mock Draft is underway. Make Ultimate NBA Mock Draft your second listen today. We're kicking off our mailbag here. We're answering questions about the draft as we did earlier, and now launching into some heavy discussions about free agency. And the question that we had before the break comes in from that one guy. He asked, could Depot be included on a sign and trade with Duncan Robinson for someone else? What are those rules like?
Yeah, so the short answer is yes. That Victor Oladipo can be included in a sign and trade, and that the Heat are able to execute that. And I think this has been an under talked about part of what Miami's offseason could look like. I've said all along, I think that the Heat should be willing to offer Victor Oladipo something above market price, something like in the $15 million a year range for 2 or 3 years, just because they have his bird rights. They could pay him anything up to the max, and it's a really easy way to sort of create a new cap slot, a new max cap. Look at the Golden State Warriors, what they were able to do when they flipped Kevin Durant for D'Angelo Russell. What they were doing was not really getting D'Angelo Russell. It was maintaining a max cap slot. And then, of course, that became Andrew Wiggins, who was a huge part in them winning the title this year. It's also a big reason why they have the biggest payroll in the NBA. But the Heat have ducked the luxury tax for the last couple of years. They're not in danger of the repeater tax. And if I were them, like, hey, if you really want to make the most of this window, and I understand Carnival Cruise Lines has not been doing great for Mickey Harrison and that family, but if you really want to try to win a championship during Jimmy Butler's window, it's time to pay up the tax, right? And I'm sick of hearing any excuses about it. Like, you own an NBA team, and what this team is worth now versus when Mickey Harrison first bought it, it's not even close. So it's time to pay up the tax. You came within a shot of making the NBA Finals. You got to go all in to improve this team. And I think a part of that would be bringing Oladipo back, maybe seeing what you get out of him with a full year and a full offseason for him to train and everything and be part of the system. But also potentially you can move him in a sign and trade deal as well, or trade him at the deadline. But in regards to the sign and trade kind of thing, that really opens up interesting possibilities too. It would hard cap Miami at about $155 million for a payroll. Now the Heat, even though I think they need to pay, that would still be over the luxury tax by about $6 million. The luxury tax is at 149 projected. The hard cap would be at 155. Right now, they're a little bit less than 130 in total payroll. So there's still quite a bit of room there. You could go out and get a Bradley Beal still and fit him under that hard cap if you really wanted to. And so, yeah, I think that that's possible. The only problem is that it does hard cap you. So if there's other moves that you want to make in addition to signing and trading Victor Oladipo to another team, then that limits you a little bit from that point. It doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means that if you were going to sign and trade Victor Oladipo for a player, that player that you're getting back in that sign and trade would have to be worth the hard cap, right? So you're not going to do it for some sort of role player. You're doing it for that quote unquote whale type, or maybe a notch below that, a high level player, if not an all-star. That's what I think it would be worth.
Well, we'll be talking about a whale in a second, but 2 quick points. One, I'm just glad we cover a team with Andy Ellisberg on there, because you know that he's going to somehow be a creative genius when it comes to perhaps the most boring aspect of the NBA, which is fudging the numbers and trying to get just the right player and get them under contract and everything else like that. He is absolutely a savant when it comes to that. He just incredible.
Jimmy Butler with $2 million in cap space.
Yeah.
Still makes no sense.
Exactly. And then secondly, you talked about the value of the team from Mickey when he first bought the group. And as a total aside from everything, just wanted to say I just finished Blood in the Garden by Chris Herring over at Sports Illustrated. Fantastic book. And just for somebody who fell in love with the game of basketball during that particular era, seeing how Pat Riley just Riley is absolutely effing nuts. Let me just put it that way. And just everything that happened with that Knicks team, his decision to leave the group, his choices when he came to Miami, just the details that Harry includes, a must read for any Heat player. Like, it's not that he goes into quite the details about the matchup between Alonzo Mourning and Patrick Ewing and those incredible playoff battles, but just that aspect of itself, like the taking away Pat Riley from the Knicks and Pat's just his requests and his demands to join the Miami Heat, a must read. Like, I found him very, very fascinating. Riley is absolutely insane, but that's why we love it. That's why he's been such a great fit for Miami. Having said that, what are the chances that Pat Riley could sign a whale? That question comes from Alex.
Yeah.
None, I'd say. He's not going to
Really?
sign anybody. First and foremost,
sign. Okay,
we'll sign
rephrase the question for Alex. Acquire instead of sign, because I think that's probably what he meant.
Yeah. Sorry if I was being petty and specific on my wording there. Having said that, I still don't see a clear-cut path to bringing in a whale. Like, I know that somehow Andy can pull it off. I know that Pat's very convincing and charming and everything else. Certainly a lot of players want to play alongside Jimmy and Bam. At least I still think that's the case. You've got to find a right guy who wants to buy into what Miami is selling. That's a little tougher. You got that last year with Kyle Lowry. He wasn't a whale, but he was the number one rated point guard prospect. A lot of teams were after Kyle Lowry for all the complaints from Heat fans about what he was this season and what he's like as a player, and he wasn't available and everything else. I mean, ask Dallas whether if they wanted him or not, and they made it to the Western Conference Finals. The New Orleans Pelicans really wanted him. A number of teams, Chicago, etc. Yeah. There was a lot of groups out there that wanted him. So, I as far as being able to acquire a whale, I don't know. I'd say 20% chance is where I'd put it at right now. I think, as we talked about in yesterday's show, right now, I think the better bet is to kind of strengthen this group on the outside and the fringes, make those moves for not a star, not a whale, but a second tier kind of player, an impactful role player that can take you to that next level.
Mostly because we don't know that whale is going to be even available, right? Donovan Mitchell is the name bandied about Heat Twitter all the time. All indications are that Utah is holding on to him at least for a year. And by the way, if that's the case, do you want to kind of take all of your assets and go all in on somebody that you think is less than Donovan Mitchell? I don't know who that player is, but just hypothetically. And then Donovan Mitchell becomes available a year from now, and now you've got no draft picks. You got nothing left to try to make that trade. That'll be a tough spot to be in if you're the Heat, right? Especially if Donovan Mitchell's like, hey, I really want to come to Miami, and Utah's like, well, they don't have anything that we want, So there's an opportunity cost to think about, right? It's not just, hey, go get somebody at all costs. There is an opportunity cost. Depending on who you ask, the Kyrie Irving situation, a lot of people think that it's just him positioning a better contract, but ultimately he's destined to end up back in Brooklyn. And there's other people who take it a little bit more seriously, that he could be on the outs. We covered that earlier this week about what his potential fit would be like, but we don't really know what his availability is point blank. Bradley Beal, ditto. He's in the same situation. He can opt out and become a free agent and potentially maneuver a sign and trade to wherever he wants to go. And presumably, because of the links between him and Miami for years, the Heat would be on his short list, but we don't know if that's going to happen either. So I would probably go with you somewhere around 20% of the Heat acquiring a whale, just not because of any lack of want to. We just don't really know if that player is available right now. Zach LaVine, it's all insiders are indicating that he's going back to Chicago. D'Angelo Russell is out there as a trade chip. That doesn't like ring whale to me.
Doesn't fit the
David.
whale.
He doesn't really fit the bill. It doesn't really fit what the Heat are looking for. I don't.
John Collins isn't a whale.
Not quite, right? He's a nice player, but then again, like that's a perfect example. I like John Collins. I think he'd be a great fit next to Bam Adebayo. But do you want to trade what it would take to get John Collins? And we don't know what it would, but presumably multiple draft picks in addition to whatever else. Would you want to trade all that for John Collins? And then a year from now, Donovan Mitchell becomes available, and now you're like, well, what happened to all those draft picks that we had? Oh, we moved it all for John Collins, and I don't think Utah would be totally excited about John Collins for Donovan Mitchell. That doesn't seem like the rebuild that they'd want to initiate. So there's an opportunity cost to consider here.
Duncan Robinson, the 27th pick, Omer Yurtseven, and a future heavily protected pick for John Collins. You pull that trade off?
So what? Is that 2 first rounders?
2 first round. This one and an upcoming one.
That's tough for
Duncan.
me. That's
Duncan
tough for me.
and Omer.
Because now you're looking at 1 first round pick that you have available. to trade. And maybe by next summer you would unlock another one as long as you traded the 2028 pick and not the 2029 pick. You could potentially unlock another one, but um
The answer is
or you could have basically 3 or 4 first round picks that you could move in a Donovan Mitchell deal instead of
with
2.
PJ looking at greener pastures, or at least bigger pastures, longer term pastures, I think you need to do something now. And I mean, we saw what happened with Bam during the injury. You can afford to bring back Dwayne Dedman. Then you can also shore it up. You know, you won't be able to shore it up with the draft, but you start looking at maybe one of those tweeners that we talked about as
Yeah.
sleepers. And, you know, that could potentially fall out of the draft. So I think there's options. You've got to start looking ahead to a PJ Tucker replacement, and I think that's
Whether or not
where the
he's
Bills
back
have
or
it.
not, I agree with you. I don't know
Okay.
if John Collins is that answer, but
Yeah.
certainly you got to start going down and start looking. PJ Washington is another name that's been reported that Charlotte could be looking to trade. That makes a lot of sense if you're Miami. I don't know again what it would cost. I have no idea what they value PJ Washington at, but you got to start looking at names. I think if you're the Heat.
All right. Well, we've done enough. We've covered enough of the questions today. We've got some more questions about some other potential free agents that we'll tackle in a future episode, but that'll wrap up for today. Thanks again for making Locked On Heat your first listen. And remember, we're going to continue to cover every aspect of the Heat offseason, from the draft to the start of free agency to summer league. We'll be there providing the coverage that you've come to expect. So make sure to subscribe to the show on YouTube or wherever you get podcasts, or on multiple platforms. We'd love to be able to reach you wherever it's best for you. You know, we've gotten a lot of information about what it takes for you to, you know, to enjoy the show, to bring the best out of the show. We're constantly making changes. We love hearing from you. So thanks so much for sticking with us throughout the offseason. That'll do it for today. I'm David Ramil signing off. Thanks so much for joining me, Wes.
Wrap it up, B.